So our trending topic today is Alex Trebek. We're going to talk about this man and particularly this struggle and challenge that he's facing in this phase of his life. He has really been a good example of someone who has dealt with a major health, potentially life-threatening health issue while he's still in the public eye. If you don't know, he has had a diagnosis of stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and he first announced this back in March of this past year. He had a round of chemotherapy. He then said the cancer was in remission, but in this past September, he said that he had to undergo another round, and there was a setback, and he's kind of taken it step at a time. So let's talk about that. The question I want to ask about that, and Emma Kate, I'm going to throw this to you first, as someone who has dealt with cancer, has survived cancer. What's your thought about someone who, we'll talk about just dealing with cancer, period, and then we'll talk about dealing with cancer in the public eye. What's emotionally, psychologically, what's the experience of it like, just hearing that you have cancer and having to go through that process? Take us through that.
Well, so I can't speak for other individuals, but for me, I was 21, so I was a senior in college when I got diagnosed, and I had other symptoms that led me to identifying a tumor in my thigh, and it was just kind of like I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know until obviously they told me, and that really sucked. So it was just one of those ridiculously numb moments where I was like, this isn't really happening. This isn't real life. I don't have cancer. And so there's a lot of denial. But in some ways, and this is where I think I'm not advocating this, but I almost I found myself putting things in containers. And it was like, okay, here are these feelings and these thoughts that I have about how I'm sick. And then here are these feelings and thoughts about how I want to live a life and I want to do things. So it was like I found myself dipping my story, my pen for my story of my life, in these different little inkwells and saying, all right, I need to let, some of the ink be used in here and some of this ink here. And I don't know, it was a really, really hard experience. But at the same time, I had a lot of love, support, and I grew a lot from it because it changed. I mean, it changed my whole life perspective. So
I want to speak to that for a minute. So about a year ago, my doctor was talking about weird blood tests and couldn't figure out what was going on. So he decided to do a, what's the thing where they scan your body with the little rubber thing?
There's a lot of those.
It's the, where you look at a baby? Ultrasound.
Oh, yes.
So they did ultrasound. And
sonogram.
I remember laying there, and the lady spent way too much time where my pancreas is. I'm like, well, that's not good. And then I got a call that day from my doctor that said, we need to do an MRI immediately. And I'm like, what? He said, well, we've seen something on your pancreas. And from that Tuesday until I got the scan on Thursday, I was a wreck, just a wreck, because I equate that as certain death. And then I couldn't sleep all Thursday night. I didn't know when I would hear back. And my doctor called me first thing Friday morning and said, I'm sorry I scared you. You're okay, blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, I don't know how people go through this. I'm sure I could deal with it, but it's really scary when you don't know.
Oh, yeah.
But thankfully, nothing happened.
And scary when you do know. And when Ellen and I first got engaged, the month that we got engaged, she woke up in her apartment one morning and she felt something on her side. She went to the doctor. They did I think it was an ultrasound as well, found a large mass, and they immediately within the week scheduled surgery, and it was a tumor. And they said, don't worry. It's not ovarian cancer. You're too young. And it was ovarian cancer. And so we started our engaged life even before we were married with that as a reality. And so it's, your thoughts just go to not just like, well, what's the implication of this for our family and all this stuff? Like people have asked me that, but more about like, is she going to be okay? Is she going to make it? I mean, she's been cancer free for 30 years now, but I remember those days as plainly as I do something from last week. They're very vivid. So bringing this back to Alex Trebek, here's a man who has this form of cancer, which is typically a very scary form of cancer. Often the prognosis is not good, not always, but often. And he is in the public eye. And not only is he in the public eye, like, oh, we see him, out in an event, he's doing his job on a daily television show. Now, I know they record it in blocks, so he's not doing it every single day, but he's out there every day on television, and he's working regularly. What do you think, just Imicate, from your experience of going there, like, what would that be like of not only having to deal with the thing, but having to deal with the thing in such a public way?
I would imagine there's a lot of pros and cons. I mean, it's just, there are things that are going to be wonderful about that because you have such an opportunity for progress to create a platform. So, for example, my cancer was a sarcoma, 1% of all the cancers. And in Charlotte, we have a wonderful organization called the Sarcoma Stomp, the Politakis Foundation. And we now have some research going on for sarcoma because they don't have a clear cause for some of them. And so for him to be able to push awareness about, hey, if you're having stomach pains, that could be unlikely, but could be something related to pancreatic cancer. Because pancreatic cancer is one of those cancers that just, it's hard to catch. And the pancreas is one of those organs where I have some surgeons who are like, don't touch the pancreas because it's a very delicate little thing. And, I think he has so much opportunity to help. And that's what I'm sticking with.
Right.
I find that the more people are radically open, wide open, sometimes raw, sharing about things that they're going through or experiencing, that it opens them up to support. But it also, you're not having to go through this by yourself. You're able to express things verbally, emotionally. You're not bottling up, keeping it inside. And so I think it was a really healthy thing for him to do, and I think it's healthy for his audience. I think he's doing a great thing for people because he's inspiring. So I think all of that is the way to go.
There's a clip that is circulated of an episode where in Final Jeopardy, the man, when he reveals his answer, says, "We love you, Alex." And it surprises Alex when the thing's revealed, and he gets choked up. He literally, like, he reads it, "We love you, Alex," and then he chokes up at just seeing that. So that's also part of this too, is like, not only you're dealing with this and not only are you receiving support, but you're also having to, in real time, like in that case, you're having to manage how are you receiving support in a public way too. Again, not just in that moment, but also just knowing that people are going to be coming up to him who know his story in a way that if he was a private person, he wouldn't have to deal with. Mm-hmm. What do you feel like in a situation like that? What is the power of support from others in terms of, for him and for other people in that situation, in terms of their getting better, their attitude mentally, and all of that? What's the role of support in that?
The role of support in this is huge. Because it's such a roller coaster for a lot of people. Again, I'm not going to make any blanket statements here today because it is everybody's own unique experience and journey. And that's literally what it is. It's a journey. Because if you have people to rely on, oftentimes, again, everybody has different love languages. And so some people might want to bring you food. Some people might want to try to talk to you about it. Some people might just want to distract you and go do something fun. And it's almost like again, my perspective, I feel like I needed all of those things at different times. And I needed more at some point and less at another. And the biggest thing you could do if you are a loved one is to just simply be open to listen and let them know that you do not understand, because even I do not understand everybody's cancer experience because I didn't have chemo. I mean, everybody's path and story is different, but you want to be available to listen if it's needed. And the advice I always give too is if you are a caregiver and you are, I would highly recommend going to appointments with a loved one and bringing a notebook, because a lot of the language that is used by physicians is very scary. And when we have that, fear response, we kind of don't remember anything. It affects our hippocampus, cortisol, stress hormone. And so write down what you hear. Have somebody do it for you. Even then come in prepared with questions to try to, manage what you can, because there's so many things that are out of your control.
Yeah, I would speak to this regarding our article in terms of integrity versus despair, is that social support is critical, but also like if it comes to cancer or it comes to the death of a spouse and you're going through some of these life transitions, you start to recognize who is a healthy person to be around and who isn't. And when you're kind of discovering that, you sort of say, okay, I need to really focus on the good and the positive and the supportive people and be okay with that and not try to change other people's perspective because maybe they just can't relate. They can't understand. That's not their fault. But you surround yourself with the good. And that's what Alex is doing. He's surrounded himself with his audience and his passion.
Mm-hmm. And his family, and he definitely has a lot of support. He's been public about that as well. And I think, what we're saying is he's a really good role model for this. And, it's at first you're like, should this man keep working and be out here with this kind of, or should he just be like, I'm all in fighting this cancer? But maybe part of what we're saying is his fight is also to continue to work and to kind of put himself out there and to continue to do his job. And that's a noble and good thing. So last question about him. Tell me anything else about this story with Alex, him as a man, him in this particular challenge and struggle, that would be beneficial to other people. Anything about gratitude, being positive, anything else that really strikes you about Alex Trebek personally, or about the way he is particularly managing this struggle in particular? Emma Kate?
Well, I know he's had a lot of health issues, as I mentioned earlier, where he had a heart attack. I think that was in 2007. And it's possible that influenced his kind of outlook on things. Again, can't speak for him, but it's almost like you never know what's going to happen. And, there's so much uncertainty. And if we think about life, too far ahead in the future, or we're stuck in the past, I am very much a believer in accepting the here and now and trying to be here as much as you can. And even then, everybody's flawed. I have attention issues, shocker. But we just, it's like we're going to get information and we can connect the dots. And we're not going to be able to connect the dots if we're not trying new things. We're not experiencing life in its fullest. So I would really say the takeaway that when I hear stuff like this, it is just such a powerful reminder to live your life in the now. Don't be irrational and go buy a plane or something ridiculous and just blow all your money if you're like, I'm going to live my best life. But that's not my point. Sorry. ADHD moment. Perfect example. So yeah, squirrel. But so trust that the dots connect in some way. And if you're present, you'll pick up on it and you'll get some sort of meaning, but it's all about your intention and what you put behind it. So.
I think he's got a great sense of humor that he holds on to and still engages in. But I was reading a quote that he says he'll leave home and he's often in terrible shape through chemo and all the other work. And he says, I get here, get in the studio, get hair, makeup done, I get my wardrobe on, the adrenaline kicks in, I go out on stage, and it's exciting for me. And he says, I have to push myself, but I'm actually working harder than I did before because it's harder for me to concentrate. I feel dull and I tire easily, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And that's just resiliency, and it's very inspiring. It's really cool that he's doing this.
Yeah, it is to me too. I've had this joke for a long time about how when people get cancer and other people will talk about them and say how brave that person is or their courageous battle against cancer. I'm like, when Dave Verhagen, if I got cancer, it would be like Dave's cowardly approach to cancer.
Dave would learn cliff diving without water.
I would be like Dave, cowardly in the face of cancer. That's what I think. Like,
but you know what? I have to interrupt because it's true. Like and sometimes it's like I think about my story and I think about other people's stories, and that's what gets kind of put on you. It was a really dark, hard time, and I think that is the value from this. It gets people to reflect and say, you know what? Yeah, that was really bad. I didn't like it. It was, and I'm like bleeping out the bajillion expletives that I would want to use because it's terrifying. And no, I handled it miserably sometimes. And I just, it is what it is. But that's the beauty of life. We don't have to be perfect. Nobody's perfect. And I don't know.
Well, now I get your point. I'm glad you said that because that's the other side. But I'm like, I just, I think we talked about it a couple of weeks ago. I tore my meniscus. And the same week that happened, one of my very best friend's mom was in a very bad accident. She's 80 years old. She broke 13 bones, broke her ribs, her vertebra in her back, her forearms, her shins, all this stuff. And I still wanted to be like every conversation. I wanted everyone to know that I'd hurt my knee, so in fact, my wife is like, is every conversation, are you going to bring that up? I'm like, yes, I am. Like, I'll never get over it. And so that's how I think when something like this would happen, I'd be like, I'll never get over it. I'll be like the worst example. And honestly, where I'm going with this is I think someone like Alex Trebek is a great model for me and for other people of like someone who presents with dignity and courage and integrity in a public way in the face of one of maybe the worst thing you could have to battle publicly. So we have tons of respect for the man. So we will talk about this as this story develops. Well, we're going to slip into our final segment. It's something that we call Doctor's Orders, and these are things that we're personally enjoying in pop culture. Frank, you had something.
I do. I've gotten back into video games as of late, and I downloaded the deluxe edition of Jedi Fallen Order. It's a single-player game. It takes place 5 years after Order 66, which was the Great Jedi Purge. And I really enjoy it. It is much, much harder than I expected. So I'm grinding through this game.
I'm going to recommend a stand-up special on Netflix from Seth Meyers. It's called Lobby Baby. And it refers to the birth of his second child who was born in the lobby of his apartment building. And it is a very good stand-up special. Highly recommend it. Lobby Baby on Netflix, Seth Meyers. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Shrink Tank Podcast. For Emma Kate Wright and Frank Gaskell in Charlotte, I'm Dave Verhagen in Nashville. We hope you tell all your friends about us and make it a great week.